Hey everyone, I hope you are having a fantastic week. I'm not sure if you've been on my Instagram in the past few days or not, but there are some exciting changes coming our way, and I can't wait to share them with you. So, over the past few months, I've really been thinking about what can I change this podcast name to that's going to resonate with all of my listeners. Now, right now, we're currently going as the North Dakota Teaching Podcast, and my name on Instagram is North Dakota Teaching. My website is North Dakota Teaching or ND Teaching. I own both domains, but I really wanted to find a name that would just resonate with all of my listeners and capture everything that we're here for. And so through the help of some of my friends on Instagram, I've been shooting out different polls. I've been asking for suggestions, and my good friend Sydney actually helped me come up with this name. And so we are officially transitioning into the Let's Talk Teaching podcast. This change should take effect next week, if not next week, by the week after for sure. We are completely rebranding, new look, new logo, everything. So in the upcoming weeks, as you are looking for this podcast, you will no longer be searching for the North Dakota Teaching Podcast, and instead you're going to be looking for the Let's Talk Teaching Podcast with me, your host, Kayla Durkin. So today, though, I know that's really exciting, but now that that's out of the way, I know the reason you're here today is because you want to learn more about how you can meet your students where they are, and that's what we're going to cover. So with that, I will see you inside of today's show.
Welcome to the North Dakota Teaching Podcast. Whether you're a first-year teacher, veteran teacher, or just a mom trying to gain some new insights, you are right where you are meant to be. Kayla Durkin, founder of the Blossoming Teacher course, is passionate about helping new teachers blossom into the teacher they were born to be. Kayla wants to help inspire teachers to be their best self, whether that means sharing about personal or professional development, self-care, or the latest and most effective teaching strategies. Through this podcast, you will hear from real teachers sharing their stories about teaching, all with one main goal in mind: to be able to make an impact and help other teachers blossom. And with that, here is your host, Kayla Durkin.
Welcome back. So today we're talking all about how we can meet your students exactly where they are. We want to ensure that we are providing our students with everything they need so that they can be confident, they can be capable, and so that they can be successful in the classroom. Now, typically we feel like this just refers to academics, but this means behavioral, social, emotional, all of those good things. However, today we are going to specifically be talking about academics. Now, I'm sure by now you all know well enough that I firmly believe if your classroom management isn't in check, if your relationships and behaviors aren't in check, that's going to make everything about your instruction that much harder. So I always want you to be focusing on that. But today specifically, we are going to be talking about the academics, the instruction that is happening within your classroom. Oftentimes we think our students need a 504 plan, they need an IEP, they need an intense intervention program, but there's something else I want to share with you. You cannot intervene your way out of a weak tier 1 system. So first and foremost, we need to make sure that our tier 1 instruction is at the forefront of everything we are doing. We need to be sure that we know the ins and outs of our content. We need to be sure that we know our standards, that we are beginning with the end in mind, that we are starting with assessments first so that we can plan our content, plan our curriculum, and plan the lessons for our students based on what they actually need, not on what our textbook is telling us they need. I don't know how many of you begin with the end in mind, but if we take time to pre-assess our students, if we take time to figure out what our students already know, we are going to be able to meet them where they're at because we're able to see exactly what they need. We're able to see what they already know. We're able to see what they possibly missed in the years prior, what background knowledge they need a little bit more of, and then of course plan our day-to-day lessons based on the data that we receive. Honestly, there are so many different ways I could take this podcast with you today because making sure that you have a strong tier 1 instruction is more than we can cover in about 15 to 20 minutes. But I want you to know that when we think tier 1 instruction, we need to be thinking about our content, we need to be thinking about our standards, but we also need to be thinking about how are we presenting this information? How are we holding our students accountable? How are we keeping our students engaged during our lessons? We want to make sure that we are reflecting on our teaching practice day in and day out so that we can see, okay, well, maybe this lesson didn't go as well as I thought it would, and here's why. I noticed today that when I presented the content in this manner, these students really weren't able to grasp what I was talking about. Why is that? When we take time to reflect every single day on what we are teaching our students, on how the lesson went, we are able to be more highly effective educators. Now, what's really cool is yesterday we kicked off our coaching program with my first year teachers. And honestly, I mean, there's more than just first year teachers in that group, but a big part of our coaching program is going through reflective practice. And one of the activities that I assign these first year teachers is to start small with their reflective practice. Each day, I want them to be thinking about one wow and one yikes. Now, when I say wow, I'm thinking, okay, I just had that lesson. It was so awesome. Now, why was it awesome? Was it because I was planned and prepared? Was it because I knew what engagement strategies my students needed? Was it because I had everything ready ahead of time? I had all of the activity supplies that we needed? Why was that awesome such a wow, wow, wow lesson? Now, the next thing I want them to do is think of a yikes. Each day, if they can just pull out one yikes and reflect on it, okay, that lesson did not go as I thought it would. Was it because I didn't know my content very well? Was it because I wasn't prepared for what my students already knew? Was it because I assumed my students had some background knowledge that they actually didn't? What about this lesson made it go so bad? Were there behaviors? Was there classroom management issues? So if we take time to reflect each and every day, if possible, now I know you teachers are super, super busy and you're thinking, I do not have time to reflect on every single lesson every single day. And I completely get that. So if possible, while you're driving home each day, just take a mental note. What was the wow? What was the yikes? If you have a lot of time, maybe at the end of the week, choose one lesson to write down as a wow and one lesson to write down as a yikes. Put it inside a journal, make it a journal that's just for you. If you want to make it really fun, put down a little funny that your student said throughout the week as well, but just take time to reflect on your teaching practice. And the more and more you do that, the stronger your tier 1 instruction is going to get because you are reflecting on what's working and what's not working. And absent-mindedly, you are using those tips and strategies that you're reflecting on every single day to make you a better educator every single day that you go back into the classroom. Now, during our tier 1 instruction, we're thinking whole group. I'm not sure if you know this or not, but our hope is that 80% of our students are tier 1 students. Those students are at grade level. Now, I completely understand that is not the reality in many schools. It is not the reality in many classrooms. But with tier 1 instruction, we can still be meeting our students where they are through differentiation, modifications, and even accommodations. Sometimes we have a hard time remembering what goes with what, so I'll just give you a few examples here. Accommodations are a way to help your students learn the same material and be able to take the same test, but in a different way. The learning targets and the standards are not being modified when we're accommodating. So some examples of accommodations include glasses, hearing aids, using notes, having color overlays, especially for students with like dyslexia or eyesight problems, using calculators, oral response, highlighting the text for them, using voice to text, giving them a separate setting, separate seating preferences, extended time limits, giving them math charts, breaks during work time or instruction. Those are all examples of accommodations. Now, when we think of modifications are when you change the lesson or activity so that the student is no longer meeting the full goal or target of the standard. Typically, a modification is made when a student is unable to learn either all of the material or portions of the material. So some examples of modifications include doing less problems or easier problems, scaffolding assignments, alternative assignments, multiple choice, word banks, eliminators, skeleton notes, leveled text, lower level content. But honestly, another great example of a modification is maybe you're doing a class book study. You want all of the students to be reading the same book, but you understand that your students are all all different abilities in your classroom, you can actually find that same story at different levels so that all of the readers in your classroom can be reading the same novel. It's just at the level that is going to meet their needs. A few more examples of modifications are maybe when you're doing word problems in math, you're using whole numbers instead of fractions, really just modifying whatever you're working on. And then differentiation. Differentiation is when students are given different tools to help meet the standard. Students are typically grouped for differentiation, and when differentiating, the content can also be more complex for your higher learners, but then at a lower ability for your lower level learners. So some examples of differentiation are when you pre-teach to a small group or you reteach to a small group, having fluid and flexible grouping using daily 5, daily 3, having visuals using turn and talk, having wait time, using questioning techniques such as building questions or split questions, whole brain teaching, varying graphic organizers, using manipulatives. There are just honestly so many different ways you can differentiate. Now, I do want you to understand that there can sometimes be a little overlap between accommodating and modifying and differentiating, and sometimes that's why it gets a little bit confusing. But for the most part, accommodating, you are not changing the standard whatsoever. Modifying, you are changing the standard or the learning target. And then differentiating, you are giving different tools to meet that standard. So hopefully you have a little bit better understanding of those three things now. So with that though, when we think about meeting our students where they are and when we think about differentiating for our students, honestly, the easiest place to begin is using a gradual release method. Now, when we think of the way things were when we were in school, oftentimes a teacher we'll use math for an example, they would explain how to do something, maybe calculate slope to the entire class, and then they would give us 15 practice problems, tell us it was homework, and it was due the next day. That is not gradual release. That is not going to meet the needs of all of the learners in our class. Instead, a gradual release method is the I do, we do, you do. Now, as adults, we use this all of the time and we probably don't even think about it. But when I say I do, that means me as the teacher, I'm going to do it first. I'm going to do a couple of examples on the board. I'm going to walk my students through it. We're going to talk about it. This is like a quick mini lesson. Then we get to the we do. The we do is where we're doing it together. I might have my students do this on their whiteboard or on their paper and pencil, on their iPad with our Apple TVs, whatever we have in our classroom to use. I'm going to give my students the opportunity to try it, then I'm going to go over it with them. Then it becomes the you do. The you do is now where it's our students' turn to do this. Now, sometimes during the you do, this is where you give the students a couple options and you say, okay, here's 4 problems on the board. You work on 3 of them. You might be circling the classroom. You might be checking in with a group. You're not quite getting into small groups yet because you're just giving them the opportunity to still work on those problems. So that's a perfect example of gradual release. You're gradually releasing the responsibility to those students. I'm a firm believer in small groups, so stay tuned. I am going to do another podcast episode where we are going to dive into small group instruction. I'm going to talk you through exactly how I set up my groups, exactly what I do with my groups. I'm going to share with you how I was able to use it in my classroom. But for today, I just want you to know that the main goals we have here is we really want to focus on our tier 1 instruction. We want to ensure that we are reflecting on our teaching practices, that we are pinpointing why did that lesson go so well? What was it about that lesson that helped my students grasp the concept, that kept them engaged, that made it just an overall great day? But also start picking out, why did that lesson go so bad? What was it about that lesson? Was I not planned? Was I not prepared? Did my students not know what they needed to know before we began that lesson? So if we take time to reflect every day if possible while we're driving home, whatever it is, to pinpoint what was so great and what wasn't great, that is going to help you make your tier 1 instruction even stronger. And then within that tier 1 instruction, if we start accommodating for our students, maybe they need that math chart, maybe they need that calculator, maybe they need some breaks during their work time. Maybe they need a seating preference. Maybe they need that color overlay so that they can read the text better. Maybe they need it in a different font. Maybe they need to sit closer to you so that they can hear you at all times. Now, modifying during our tier 1 instruction, maybe they need multiple choice. Maybe instead of 4 choices, they need to only be able to have 2. Maybe they need some skeleton notes during your whole group instruction. Maybe they need their novel study to be at the level that is appropriate for them. And then when we think about differentiating, teaching, we can really start with that gradual release method, using our turn and talk time, giving wait time, using whole brain teaching, graphic organizers, manipulatives. So when we think about meeting our students where they're at, we really are going to need to get into that small group instruction, and we will dive into that. But if that's not where you are in your journey right now, I really want you to really just be intentional about what you are doing in your whole group instruction. And I also want to remind you that our students' attention span is 10 to 15 minutes at most, especially for middle school kids. If you teach primary students, their attention span is probably closer to 5 to 7 minutes. A really good rule of thumb is whatever age your students are, that number is the amount of minutes that they can sit and listen. So if they're 7 years old, 7 minutes is about their max. That's why mini lessons are so effective, and then we want to get into our small group instruction. But for now, just know during your whole group instruction, really be reflecting on what's going well, what isn't going well. Do you need more engagement strategies? Are you pre-assessing your students to find out what they know and what they don't know? Are you using those pre-assessments to help drive your instruction? Are you beginning with the end in mind, knowing where you want to go so that you don't have any surprises? Are you previewing your content in your curriculum, especially if you are following a very scripted curriculum? These are all things that we can do to ensure that we are meeting our students where they are. As I said, my challenge for you is really to pick out that wow and that yikes and just spend some time reflecting on that over the next couple weeks. And if you would like, if you're comfortable, reach out to me, share your wow with me, share your yikes with me. Let me help you stay accountable. Let me help you do some reflecting with you, to ask you some questions, to get you to dig a little bit deeper. So if you're listening to this and you had a wow lesson or you had a yikes lesson, come on over, send me a DM on Instagram. I would love to chat. And as always, I just want to remind you, you are exactly where you are meant to be. You are exactly who your students need you to be. And together we are going to make a big, beautiful difference for all of the lives of our students and all of the learners that are in our classroom. So thank you so much for listening to today's episode. And again, do not forget, we're going through a podcast name change. So the next time you search for our podcast, please be sure you type in Let's Talk Teaching with Kayla Durkin. And with that, I will see you in the next episode.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the North Dakota Teaching Podcast. If you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. We really appreciate that effort. Be sure to tune in to the next episode for more teaching tips to make an impact. Until next time.